It's funny how little jokes can often conceal the truth. A warning for people willing to open their eyes and listen. Most people aren't ready and instead prefer to live their lives inside a safe, comfortable bubble. Unfortunately, it was hiding a real event where humanity's future was on the line. The rumor started as a joke, back as an internet meme to justify the amount of red eyes in photographs. Nearly everyone, including yours truly, has a picture of them as a child with those red eyes. Their natural eye color is concealed by another, bright red, orange, or sometimes yellow. For most people, the brief infestation resulted in nothing but a funny photo to giggle over, with no long-term side effects. But for others, well, I guess I'll tell you. The hysteria was based in truth, but later turned into a distraction. For many people, the satanic panic was a time to assume the worst. Music associated with various acts. There was a suspicion of hidden lyrics containing subliminal messages to corrupt the youth. Well, true, to a degree. It wasn't in every single pop song, or even the heavy metal they blamed for the degradation of society. It was random, often in those repetitive sounds, like elevator music or call waiting. If you listened to it once, it wouldn't do anything, but the seed was planted. With every time it was listened to, it would grow. I remember, in my first encounter with it, I remember walking to the kitchen to ask my mum if I could borrow her Walkman to listen to Back in Black by AC/DC on cassette tape. My father was a police officer, a detective to be precise, and had been dealing with increased cases of random violence. I was lured into the kitchen by the aroma of mince sizzling in one pan and hamburger helper in the other. The large boombox spat out from the corner.
There's been an increase in drug-related violent crimes throughout multiple cities across the United States. Police are worried.
Then my mother abruptly changed the radio station, turning it to Babushka by Kate Bush, her latest favorite. I expected her to be dancing along to the music, but instead, I remember my mother standing at the phone, close to the wall, while circling the curled cord around her fingers, her back to me. I couldn't hear him, but I could certainly hear her.
Honey, no, that can't be real.
She leaned close, her hand covered the phone. There was a pause.
I do have some, but I need to get them developed.
Another pause.
I'll go to the chemist tomorrow and...
Another gap in the conversation. The worry etched into her voice.
Honey, I'm worried about you. This is impossible.
When do you think you'll be coming home? Clearly, she still hadn't noticed me. The mince was beginning to burn. She cursed and lit a cigarette, holding it in her mouth. She held the phone between her ear and shoulder while giving it a stir. She let out an audible sigh.
Alright, I'll do it. Gotta go. Love you. Bye.
Tapped her forehead against the wall and murmured,
Fucking hell. He's losing his mind.
And startled when she saw me. My parents never swore at this age, at least not when I was around. She forced herself to smile, and I had an uneasy feeling. "Ah, hey, sweetie. Are you hungry?" she asked with strange cheeriness. That was the first incident. We didn't talk about it afterward. When he came home, they greeted each other lovingly, like usual. But there was tension in the air. She kept her word and went to the chemist to get the photographs developed. 3 days later, they were of the following: my 11th birthday party, their wedding anniversary, and some random party of theirs. The first 2 were recent, while the party was done years ago. The bundles sat on the circular kitchen table, with a packet beneath them, and I went over for a sneak peek. I lifted the ones on top. It was me in front of my ice cream birthday cake, with my parents on either side. Her makeup was colorful, her perm was big, and my father had a thick mustache, all his hair, and a mullet. We all wore smiles, looking happy, and had red eyes. I placed it back down, and when my dad burst in through the front door, he ruffled my hair in greeting, ignoring my protest when he went past, making a direct line to the photos, picking each of them up, flicking them dismissively on the floor, and muttering curse words under his breath. He lifted his duffel bag on the table, took out a small brown bottle, a flask, and a folder with a coffee-rimmed stain on it. He popped the cork, held it to me, and there was a strong aroma of alcohol. I remember turning my head while he tried to encourage me to take it, telling me it would cure me, and I needed to do this. It got louder between us, and Mum ran in, tersely pushing him away and asking him what the hell he was doing. He told her she'd need to take it too, and that we had been infected for months, if not years.
You need to take it.
He took a deep breath, arched his back, and ran his hand through his hair. I think he realized how crazy he sounded.
Look at the photos for yourself. All of us have red eyes.
She rolled her eyes, lighting up a cigarette in irritation, and he interrupted her.
Look at the files. The government's been aware of this. Please, take it. I don't know when it will happen.
When what will happen? Honey, when what will happen? You sound crazy right now. Take a chill pill. He offered it to her now, considering my mother's love of whiskey. I could tell she was considering drinking it, and snatched it out of his hand, trying to see the label, then thought better of it and pushed his hand away. My father tenderly took her hands in his, ignoring the cigarette burning his skin, and stared intently at her.
Please, you have to listen.
He pleaded. Her eyes softened and subtly moved from side to side, then lowered in concern.
Please, it won't hurt you. It's just medicine. See?
He demonstrated by taking a mouthful of it, then opening his mouth to show her the contents, swallowing and opening it again to show her it was empty. But how could you trust someone who was so unhinged? However, this was enough for her. Trusting him, she accepted, taking a mouthful, and winced at the taste before swallowing. Visibly, he looked relieved and turned his attention back toward me. I knew he wanted me to have some. At this point, I lost control of my body, however briefly, and went on autopilot. Since I couldn't see myself, I'll tell you what they saw. My eyes flashed red, and I charged at my parents, striking them with my hands, and together, They held me down to force me to drink it. The results were a success, except the burning sensation I had down my throat and an upset stomach. I was perfectly okay. We had a family meeting where my dad told us that demons were real, but weren't like what was seen on TV. And it wasn't like The Exorcist.
I don't know which branch of the government's behind this, and I'm not supposed to know. So I need both of you to stay quiet. Promise me?
He said, picking his cuticles and tapping his fingers. Will you get in trouble if they find out you know? A long stare gave her the answer.
Other than some expensive equipment, photography is the best way to go, so...
He reached into his duffel bag and handed us each a Polaroid camera. I held mine, examining it with a grin, while my mother raised a dismissive eyebrow of hers before placing it on the kitchen table. I asked for one for ages, but never expected to get one for myself.
When you talk to someone, take their picture, and if you see red, you'll know. Most people are infected, but the demon lays dormant.
Is that what happened to me?
Yes and no. You were scared and being influenced by what? See?
He paused, trying to explain it.
Imagine being outright commanded to do something you don't agree with. You'd fight it, right?
I nodded.
But a subtle whisper here and there over a period of months, even years, is usually enough.
What do they want? She exhaled after a long line of smoke, the doubt still etched into her voice. He lifted his arms and shrugged. His eyes darted back and forth as he looked through the duffel bag.
I can't tell you. What I will say is that...
Lifting the newspaper, unfolding it, and showed us the first page. The headline read, "Brutal satanic killing," and he pointed.
That is a suspected case. And over here...
His finger snapped to a picture of two innocent and frightened teenagers, their eyes wide and faces drawn in, fearful.
The aftermath. The demon will recede inside, letting the human pay the price for the crime. This is one of many cases.
It didn't explain why it occurred.
There are other cases. Look.
Taking the enormous folder, opening it, and showing them to us, case after case, dropping them on the table. The faces and mutilated corpses of people stared back at us. My mother reached over, taking the folder, and flipped through the remaining ones, then took a long drag of her cigarette. She exhaled and gazed wide-eyed and murmured something under her breath that I couldn't understand. I guess we're gonna have to call the school. She can't go if every damn person is harboring a demon. My mother leaned back, reaching for the phone, taking the receiver in her hand and pressing the buttons, only to have my dad take the phone and put it back on the hook.
We have to be careful. They might know what we did, and they will try to reinfect us. We need to be there for each other, as a family.
He said, reaching out for us to take his hands, and both of us accepted. I didn't think my family were particularly close, yet the onset of tragedy had that impact on people. That night was uneventful, and every day since was akin to a regular old day. The only difference was, we'd have a mouthful of the concoction before we left for the day. The months moved by, and I was walking home from school after catching the school bus, and waved goodbye to my classmates. I felt an uncomfortable feeling, like being watched, and as though a predator had me in their sight. I glanced over my shoulder to see two people following me, twins that lived up the road. They were 7 paces away, not making any noise, and I quickly turned to take out a Polaroid picture of them. Shaking the photo in my hand, and as I walked, I saw the red eyes. I exhaled, my pace quickened, and I tried not to run, or at least make it look obvious. I heard them following me, and ran to my house, only to hear their pace quicken behind me. I ran to the front door, smacking it with my fist, until my mum opened the door, still with her nightgown on, with her curlers in her hair, a characteristic cigarette hanging from her mouth. "What the fuck's going on? Don't bang on the door!" she demanded, giving me a smack whilst pushing me inside. Then she noticed the kids, a hand resting on her hip and using her body to block the doorway, the cigarette held between the fingers she used to point at them. "Got a problem?" she snapped, and her body jerked as she took a step back before slamming the door, locking it behind her. Her body pressed on it, breathing heavily, and we stared at each other. No words needed to explain what transpired between us. A mutual understanding. My mother peeked out the curtains, put her body between us, glaring out at them with an irritated puff of her cigarette. Her body blocked my view, but I saw them walking away, their steps like usual, and they started chatting again. "We're gonna need to tell your father about this." The worry clear in her voice. The last time she said that, I was in trouble. We finished our chores, me with my homework at the kitchen table, while she was cooking sloppy joes. My father came home. His face was sunken in, and I noticed he'd been losing weight. The disturbed sleep was taking a toll on his mental health. He sighed wearily when he saw our faces. His jaw tensed and pulled out the wooden chair at the kitchen table.
What happened?
"She was followed home today by kids. Infected with you know what." I could hear the tension in her voice, and she turned back to face the kitchen sink, staring out as the neighbor's children played outside. My dad stood, walked over, and held her close from behind. For a moment the pair held each other, and I stood watching, leaning on the wood panel on the wall, and I didn't know what else to add. All except, what do I do if it happens again? Silence. My father's head dropped to rest on my mother's neck for support.
I've heard.
He paused, considering his next words carefully.
Incidents, too, from colleagues and people on the street.
My mum glared up at him in clear worry over it, and he gave her a complacent smile of reassurance, one I doubted worked.
I think it is best for us, too.
He ran his hands through his beard, inhaling, and closed his eyes.
Go elsewhere, at least for the time being. Just get out of Dodge for a while.
Something about his tone suggested it would be for longer, and he didn't want to admit it. My mother's lips became a thin line, the wrinkles on her forehead more pronounced, and I knew she didn't want to give our comfortable life up.
We need to be discreet about it. Pack your backpack, as though you were just going out for the day.
He said to me, then turned his attention back to her.
Take only the essentials. Since it's Friday, we're not expected to go out, but I'm on call.
She lit up again. Her hand rested on the kitchen cabinet. A nagging question brought to the surface. "Who else is free of it?" I asked, and my mum rushed to sit down across from him. "Yes. Anyone we can go to for help? Someone we can talk to?" She eagerly inquired. "There has to be someone. The one who gave you that." She gestured to the bottle he gave us. "There has to be a name." Tell me. His eyes narrowed, carefully moved from me to her. He reached into his duffel bag, taking out that same infamous bottle again. Not removing his gaze from either of us, the bottle lid opened, and part of our new routine, I accepted my mouthful, wincing and swallowed. Noticing the change in Mum's face. It was her body, but not her mind. The wrong muscles were used when she smiled. The expression locked on her face, and I took an instinctive backward step.
Tell me who else knows.
The voice was certainly not hers, threatening him. He stood up, went toward her, and she drew her hand back with a clenched fist. He blocked her, taking the arm and twisting it behind her back. They were together on the floor, each trying to get an upper hand, while I glanced around at the various items. I could have used a frying pan, but that would have caused too much damage. He held her arms behind her back with one arm, while using the other to prevent her from biting his thigh. Despite it, I could tell he was trying not to hurt her. I was shocked and terrified. Never had he hurt her, let alone treated her this way, and I didn't expect him to be capable of this. She wailed and screamed frantically, convincingly, and if I didn't know, I would have suspected my father was attempting to kill her. She flailed around, her manicured nails scratched down his face, and finally, the liquid entered her mouth, and she swallowed, screeching, kicking, and her body went limp on the ground. Her lips had the same burn marks mine did.
Honey, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It had to be done.
He stroked her hair. With tears in her eyes, she nodded in understanding, and wept with relief when there was a sharp knock on the door. We all froze. There was another series of sharp knocks. There couldn't be a worse time for a visitor to arrive. Neither of my parents were presentable for company, so I walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. There were 2 people standing there. I stepped backward, looking at my parents for guidance, finding none, and then back through the peephole again. My 2 neighbors stood on the doorstep. Both of them were part of the Homeowners Association, and in normal circumstances, I would have dreaded hearing and seeing them. In the current, the woman looked through the peephole right back at me, causing me to jump back.
We heard you screaming. Is everything alright in there?
Her voice called out to us. Yeah, we're okay.
Are you alright, sweetie?
Her words were sickeningly sweet. Yes, we're busy. Please go away.
We heard a scream. Do we need to call the police?
A male voice interjected, and the doorknob started to violently rattle. No.
Let us in!
The voice roared.
We're here to help you. Let us in. We'll take good care of you.
She leered through the window of the front door.
Heather, step away from the door.
My father ordered. He was standing with a shotgun aimed in the direction of the door. My back pressed up against the wall. I backed away when I heard Call Me by Blondie playing on the boombox. My mother, still with her lips burnt, came up with my father's pistol. She waved me over to stand beside her and used her body to shield me. Dad used his body to obscure the gun and open the door. I can't tell you what his facial expression was like, nor can I tell you what they looked like at the time.
Hello, we're fine. Goodbye.
He said, then closed the door.
We're waiting.
The call came out.
I said to let us in!
I noticed people approaching the front lawn. I recognized some, but not all of them. They walked at a steady pace, and I reached for my Polaroid camera and took pictures of the crowd, allowing the photographs to fall freely. They kept coming forward, getting closer to the window, and I picked up the photographs off the floor. All of them had glowing red eyes. The image was blurred, and my focus locked on the sight before me. I felt my father grab my arm. "No, wait!" I called out, grabbing the Polaroid camera, and he picked me up, carrying me out to the car. My family were nearly surrounded. The car reversed swiftly and started to drive away. I peeked over the back seat of the car, staring out, and saw people on both sides of the street, slowly following the car. We didn't have all the supplies we needed, and left. We kept driving, only stopping for basic supplies, and drove out to the middle of nowhere. My mother reached out with her hand, squeezing his forearm.
We're concerned for you. Come back.
"We'll be okay," she said, although I've never seen her smoke so much. We kept driving. The road was endless. Soon suburbia changed to a rural setting, and fewer people caused my parents to relax temporarily. We stopped by the side of the road to rest, used the restroom, and grabbed some McDonald's through drive-thru. The golden arches were a welcome sight, not wanting to stay near people. My dad parked by the side of the road and listened to the radio.
Good evening, ladies and ghouls. It's your host with the most, The Rock. Live on air, baby. Yeah.
It followed many obnoxious sounds, long beeps, random noises, quotes from TV and movies.
We're here today bringing you the best tunes. We got Breaking the Law by Judas Priest. And later, hop on board to the crazy train with Ozzy. And after the break, it's so radical, only the best sounds.
There were more obnoxious sounds.
We got our guests here today. Only the coolest bands and the best tunes. 192.1 Cool FM brings you only the best tunes. Live 24 hours, bringing you all the greatest rock tunes. So stay rad, baby.
We listened in silence to the rambles, but the next part stood out. This time, the host took on a serious, professional tone.
You know, I love the America. I'm talking beer, I'm talking rock, and I'm talking boobs. But one thing that ain't cool, man, is being armed and extremely dangerous with your family. I'm talking about former Detective Scott Wilson, who also is a former police officer. Make sure y'all are on the lookout for him, ladies and gentlemen. He is about 36 years old, 5'11", short brown hair, beard, average build, along with his wife, Monica, who's around 5'8". She got black hair like a goth girl. Average build, and they have kidnapped their child, Heather Wilson, who is around 11 years old, 5 foot and strawberry blonde hair. Gotta keep an eye out for them. They are considered armed and dangerous, like this next track.
Our names. My dad's grip on the steering wheel grew tighter. He started the ignition, and silently, we kept going down into the sticks. The headbeams in front of us remained steady. Beside us were the rows of paddocks that were the only scenery, with their fences whizzing past us. I didn't know where we were going.
And back to our regularly scheduled program, The Rock at 101.1, The Rock FM, bringing you
The voice was interrupted and morphed into a cold, demonic one.
Do you think that we will ever stop hunting you?
He nearly crashed when he heard it, barely staying stable. "Look, you need to pull over. You're exhausted. You need to stop. You're gonna kill us." My mother begged and demanded, squeezed his arm again. Defeated in more ways than one, he nodded, flicked on the indicator, and pulled over to the side of the road. He put the car in park and rested his head on the steering wheel. Silent, except for a long breath. I remember being worried about him dying there. Then remained still before he turned off the ignition. "You'd best get some rest. We'll be setting off in the morning," my mother said. My father groaned in protest, but soon fell asleep. I can't remember dozing off or not. I knew I must have when I woke with a jolt. My mother had the window down and was already smoking, all without her morning coffee. She turned in her seat. Her eyelids were droopy and had dark circles under her eyes. "Morning. We'll get you some food soon." My father was still asleep. She reached out to give him a nudge, then shook him to get his attention, and a long, irritated groan answered her. "Hey, wake up."
Wake up.
His voice changed and we both froze. Suddenly he reached down to the bottle, yanking it open, and took a mouthful. He gasped before giving her an apologetic look, before handing her the bottle. She took a mouthful, who in turn handed it to me. I accepted mine. Returning it to him, he held it up, feeling how much we still retained, and placed it on his lap. Neither of us had slept well. According to them, they took turns keeping guard during the night. We drove to a tiny diner, and were able to sit down properly for a moment. There were only a few cars out the front.
"Hello, darlings. What can I get y'all?"
The southern twang came from the waitress. She had a blonde-dyed bob, a curvaceous figure, and a classic 50s style of clothing. She came over with a pot of coffee, poured it for Mum and left it there. We ordered our food, and it wasn't long before she came over, holding our plates.
There y'all go. Let me know if you need anything else.
How busy is the town?
Oh, we're about the quiet life out here. You enjoyed the food you hear. I'll be right over there.
We got a decent meal. I got pancakes and syrup. My father got eggs, bacon, sausage, the works, while my mother simply got a black coffee. It felt like too much. Surely we couldn't access our money anymore. Why were they indulging? I didn't ask and kept eating.
We need to go back and get more. I don't want us to turn.
We need to avoid people.
Remember what happened at the house?
She snapped, then remembered to whisper when the waitress and line cook stared at us. She gave them a strained smile before taking a massive gulp of her coffee and avoiding their gaze.
If we don't get more or a steady supply, all of this will be for nothing.
He retorted and fell silent for a moment. He still picked up the food, gradually taking the time to devour it, and sipped on his drink. It was suspicious. We paid our tab, tipped the waitress, and went back to the car. He went to a nearby payphone, leaned on it, and rested his hand on his forehead. I remember how crushed he looked, barely hanging on by a thread. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I couldn't hear the name.
I need more. We're running out. Yeah. You heard the broadcast.
A pause. His forehead touched the top of the box.
National news. Fuck.
He listened, nodding in understanding, despite the other person on the line not being able to see him. His jaw tightened, blinking slowly.
All right. We'll do it.
He hung up the phone. My mother and I stared at him in bewilderment. His eyes were wide, strained and intense, growing steadily desperate, and he pulled away when Mum tried to comfort him. A brief flash of hurt in her eyes before she pushed him away. Her eyes narrowed, and they turned their bodies away from each other. Silently he walked back to the car and got in the driver's side sat down and waited for us to get back. I saw the waitress on the phone watching us. Her eyes locked on mine, and I was sure her eyes briefly glowed. We drove away, through roads with large cracks, weeds growing through them, and finally, all asphalt fell away to dirt paths that hadn't been walked on for some time. We came to a rundown trailer with nothing but a dust lawn out the front, a well-used fire pit, and it looked like no one was home, and hadn't been there for some time. I had no idea how my dad would even know someone like this. "Dad?"
Stay here.
he said, opened the car door, and walked towards the entrance, slowly, peeking through the filthy windows, and whatever he saw made him feel confident enough to continue. "It'll be okay, honey." My mother comforted me, but I sensed she needed it herself. The caravan door opened, and the barrel of a shotgun appeared, causing my dad to put his hands up. A man with a wild grey beard appeared, pointing the shotgun at my father. I couldn't hear what my dad was saying to him, but he raised his hand to us to tell my mother to put the gun down. She lowered it rather than dropping it on the ground.
Who sent you, you slimy little...
He snarled. The long grey beard reached his stomach, and a set of overalls completed his attire.
Easy, Billy. It's me, Scott.
With my father's back to me, I could only see this Bill character. He looked wild and foreign to bathing, but a large, toothless grin greeted him in response. The shotgun now placed in the crook of his arm, and they spoke. My dad showed him the bottle. Bill took it, sniffed it, and shrugged his head before pointing to his trailer. He roughly opened the door, allowing it to slam, and went inside, leaving my dad waiting outside. A couple of minutes passed, and Bill ran out, screaming, and handed the bottle along with a box of the same bottles. My dad tucked a few inside his coat. I wasn't sure what the reason was for the sudden panic, until I saw them. I could see Bill carrying a large bucket. My dad opened his shirt, and I thought I saw a strange pattern carved into him.
Go on! Get! I'll keep them here! You get away! Yeah!
Bill called out before letting out an obnoxious holler. Instead of frightened, he sounded like he was loving it. The locals and people from the nearby towns, all possessed, with glowing red eyes, came out of the forest and made their slow, determined walk toward us. Oblivious to trees and stray branches, their clothing was dirty and torn, immune to scratches and torment offered to them. And this time, the possession had greater control. Bill fired on them with a shotgun, causing a large hole in a couple of them, their blood and organs sprayed.
Come and get it!
He called out, dunked his shotgun into the liquid, and started opening fire again. The shells putting holes in them, this time causing flames to burst from the holes, and the others would catch fire from them, only to have it spread swiftly amongst them. They screeched while attempting to escape, while Bill let out a wild man's laugh. My father ran back to the car, his shirt open, and I could definitely see it. Red. Painted or burned, I wasn't sure. Whilst Mum had the gun ready, laying it across her lap. She hated having guns in the house. "Mum, give me a gun," I demanded, with no understanding of how to use the weapon. She ignored me. I lifted the Polaroid camera, now stained with blood, and took a series of photographs of them. They landed beside me, creating a mess on the floor. Their eyes were bright red, facial features twisted into foul beings. My dad held the box in the crook of his arm, and the possessed grabbed at it, shaking it, and pulling it from his hands, causing the box to fall and for the bottles to break, spilling the liquid. The ones who had been sprayed also burst into flames. Their bodies flailed, only to have their ranks filled by others, driven forward by the cause. Their remains dropped to the ground, forgotten. We drove away through the compound, seeing semi-built empty houses with no people, completely unclaimed. It was deserted, and we were able to breathe for a moment, only for several of the possessed to launch themselves at the car, breaking the glass and reaching inside to pull us out. I'm sure my mother had questions about the symbol on his chest, but priorities shifted. Surrounded, we needed to make our escape while we could. My dad took the box with only a few bottles left, grabbed my mum's hand, who fired her shotgun in their direction. Both held mine with one of their own. We ran trying to find somewhere safe, but every corner we turned, they would appear.
Come on, quickly.
He roared at us, eagerly pushing us forward, and appeared to be looking for something. His head rapidly moved from side to side, peering around corners, but wouldn't tell either of us what it was. We were chased through buildings, and I struggled to keep up with them. We found ourselves in Bill's old distillery, surrounded by bottles and larger jars for brewing more of the liquid. Well, half of this, the other half for his other gig, selling moonshine. The aroma of alcohol was thick in the air. The Polaroids were no longer needed. Their eyes glowed and followed us at a walk. Once they were in range, their hands punched the windows, causing their mortal bodies to bleed. The moment they were inside, they started breaking all the bottles. We made our way to the back room, a closet, and hid inside. But it was only a matter of time before they would break through. We tried to hold each other, ignoring the snarling, roaring, and taunts coming from them.
Where are you? I thought you was hungry,
she said, menacing and depraved. We moved out of the closet, breaking away and finding a semi-destroyed room with the walls bare, naked. My dad flipped a table and they barricaded the doorway while I searched the boxes, finding old newspapers and random broken junk, all in search of that precious liquid. All the bottles had been broken bar one, and it barely contained enough for the three of us. He offered me the bottle and I took a mouthful, grimacing as I swallowed it down.
Open the door, sugar.
The demented voice tormented me. Her face was being cut from the glass as she forced her way through, slicing into skin that peeled off. She was oblivious to the pain, driven forward by an unseen force. My mother turned my head away, so I was forced not to look.
Come on, open up for us.
Her southern drawl lost all of its friendliness, and now only malice. He tried to keep us focused on him, ejecting the magazine to check how many bullets remained, then looked at us and then back at the gun. His mouth tightened and I saw water in his eyes. I don't know what dark thoughts of protection he had in store for us, but I can only guess.
There isn't enough for you. Who will you pick? Who will I take control of?
The demented voice no longer had a source. It came from all around us.
You now.
My father insisted, holding the bottle to her. Honey, no, there isn't enough. My mother's hand ran through the broken glass, cutting her hands and trying to find a bottle with enough liquid for him. But it was a fool's errand. He shook his head, moving away from us, and the possessed circled us, their hands reaching inside, summoned by his call. He joined her in searching and leaned back on the wall, pushing us away and closing it. A stray piece of wood blockaded the doorway, causing it to remain open, all in quiet resignation of his fate.
Tell him I made you all do it.
A desperate and loving look in his eyes. What? No! My mother snapped.
They will try to take Heather away. You need to do it.
He insisted. You saved us.
They need to think the worst of me. Is the only way I can save you.
Finally, she relented, taking me by the hand and pulling me away from him, cradling me on her body, trying to shield my eyes with her hands, but I could peek through the cracks. The symbol on his chest glowed, then sizzled as it burnt when he ran a red mark over the top. I saw a red liquid move under his skin, a flash of red behind his eyes, and I knew it would be soon. His free hand gripped the ground beside him tightly. I could see the tensions taut under his skin and straining muscles, desperate for control. Sweat dribbled down his forehead, and instinctively, we knew he was barely hanging on. He gazed at us, tears forming in his eyes, and raised the handgun to his temple. I could see his hand shaking, and a tear ran down his cheek before he fired, causing his skull and brain tissue to go flying. The demon inside him was no more, and neither was my father. My mother and I sat with our faces coated in his blood and gore, while confused voices spoke around us. I remember a conversation my mother had with a policeman while paramedics checked us.
Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?
She stared out into nothing, her arms wrapped around her frame, and still coated with untold amounts of blood.
Ma'am, I need you to answer.
He took us, she replied, in a daze, still not looking at him. He was sick, hearing voices, and then took us at gunpoint. A tear of betrayal ran down her cheek.
Do you know how the others came out here?
I don't know.
Did he work with anyone?
He asked, writing it all down. I think so. He never told me their names. Different radio stations delighted in the news.
There has been a grim aftermath to a disappearance. Scott Wilson killed himself and others while locking himself away in a closet surrounded by members of his cult. Several people are left dead or gravely injured. Police have taken the family into safety. Rumor had it there was a demonic attack.
Going through the different radio stations immediately after was a nightmare.
Oh my god. If you thought that Wilson case couldn't get any weirder, psych.
We need to get back to Jesus. Wilson, he didn't go to church. That's why he went crazy.
Is this the new Charles Manson case? I blame violent music in the media these days. People should really parent their children better.
I've been warning all of you. The government is in league with the devil, and we are their test subjects.
Please! We need to worry about more violence on TV.
As for the survivors, many lied to themselves and to the police, saying they were part of a cult. The police and another agency, including a secret branch, all worked together to erase all my father's good deeds, casting him as a psychotic madman driven by delusions. It succeeded, and they covered up the case. I changed the radio station.
Rumor has it that the former Detective Wilson was involved in cult activity, drawing innocent victims into his cult. The fact that this man is no longer among us to hurt us is a miracle.
For the briefest moment, the radio presenter sounded sincere before going back to his usual tirade.
Because this is The Rock! Because here, in this country, we take care of business, and they listen to The Rock! The case has been solved. What a crazy day, but we're taking in calls and giving away t-shirts. Hell yeah! And stay chill.
In order to protect us, we did what he said. My father is remembered by wider society as a crazy man on a power trip, mentally unstable and crazy. But my mother and I, and crazy old Bill, and anyone else who knew that he protected humanity through his sacrifice. I struggled when I was young. Later, I knew he did it to protect us, yet that gap in our lives left an irreplaceable hole. The uprising ultimately had failed, yet there were some who managed to escape. My teenage years were hell. Duh, your dad was a little bitch, so fucking crazy, and... She taunted me before I put my fist into her face. It wasn't the first nor the last time. My rebellious phase led to an occasional violent outburst. Simply to relieve the pressure, I guess. I would be dragged into counselors' offices to talk about my issues, and this only encouraged other teenagers to tease me about it.
Heather, please, tell me about your anger issues.
The school counselor sat across from me with an artificial smile. I didn't answer, but after an uncomfortable silence, I said, "Do you want the truth?"
Yes, please tell me. I want to know about all of this so I can help you.
He sat forward, eyes lit up, delighted at the prospect of having a breakthrough with his latest project. Ready to burst, knowing he could write a bestseller that bored housewives would read about how he managed to get through to that girl with the crazy father. My father was a good man, fighting against overwhelming odds. People became possessed and tried to hurt us. I paused, my eyes dipped down, and I picked at my broken cuticles.
I see.
I burst his bubble. He cleared his throat and scribbled down his notes.
Did he do anything?
No. I shot that down immediately and went back to the script. He was unwell but a good man, whose dark thoughts led him to do some sad and unfortunate things. Given what happened to me, teachers tended to let me off the hook, telling me I was a psycho just like my dad. I couldn't offer any retorts. My mum, who struggled after the loss of my dad, taking up alcoholism full-time rather than casually. One thing that brought me a sense of peace was photography. Surprisingly, but only landscapes and animals. Whenever I dabbled in photography with people, I'd stare or get a glimpse of red eyes in the picture, remembering those days. Most of the time, it was just a false alarm, and I know how to deal with the few. Get him to drink some of old Bill's recipe. I don't know how the old bastard managed it, but he survived and evaded the law. And between us, I'm not going to share how he did it, in case I ever need to use what I learnt. The new technology that has been developed has made it easier to spot them, but the rise of social media has also increased infection. So, beware. Don't forget, you can always catch them out by their glowing red eyes in photographs. One picture, it's fine. But if a person has multiple, it is best to keep yourself and your family safe.
Hey bro, this is The Rock from Rock FM, bringing you the best music since the 80s. We're talking about old cases. Who remembers the Wilson case from 1980?
Siri, turn off that fucking idiot on the radio. The old fart was still doing his piece from the 80s in 2025. I said, taking a mouthful of the concoction of that foul drink. The recipe was a gift from Bill back in 1990 when I popped by to say hello, with a little shotgun diplomacy. The fact that my dad, to this day, is still seen as a psycho and a murderer when he sacrificed himself, it still hurts. So, in the modern day, if you see someone with red eyes in a photograph or a video, if someone starts behaving weirdly, best to watch your back around them. The uprising could be happening again, and you've got to be on your guard. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.